I woke up drowning again. Not in water this time, but in that suffocating darkness that always comes with the dream. The same dream I've had every night for 8 years now. My parents' faces, twisted in terror as the yacht tilts impossibly far. To starboard, the sound of splintering wood and my mother's scream cutting through the Mediterranean wind like a knife through silk. And then, always, that moment when I realize I'm the only one who's going to make it out alive. My chest was heaving. As I sat up in my king-sized bed, cold sweat making the Egyptian cotton sheets cling to my skin like seaweed. The digital clock on my nightstand read for 37 a.m., its red numbers glowing like angry eyes in the darkness of my Malibu mansion. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the Pacific stretching endlessly toward the horizon, still cloaked in pre-dawn shadows. You know that feeling when you wake up and for just a split second, you forget where you are. For me, it's the opposite. I remember exactly where I am, and I remember exactly why I'm here, alone in a house that could fit 20 families, with more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, and absolutely no one who gives a damn whether I live or die. My name is Alexandros Katanides, and 8 years ago, I was supposed to die with my parents in the Aegean Sea. Instead, I inherited their shipping empire, their real estate portfolio, and their guilt. All of it. Every single crushing pound of it. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my bare feet hitting the cold marble floor. The nightmare had been particularly vivid tonight. I could still taste the salt water, still feel the yacht's deck buckling beneath my feet as my father pushed me toward the life raft. "Take care of the family, Alexandros," he'd said, his voice steady even as everything around us fell apart. "Take care of our legacy." Some legacy. A 29-year-old man who hadn't had a real conversation with another human being in months, who ran a billion-dollar empire from behind computer screens and conference calls, who couldn't sleep without pharmaceuticals and couldn't wake up without wanting to crawl back into the darkness. But I couldn't just lie here and let the memories devour me. Not again. I needed to move, needed to feel my blood pumping and my lungs burning with something other than grief. I needed to run. 20 minutes later, I was jogging down the private path that led from my estate to the public beach. The air was crisp with that particular California morning chill that always reminded me I wasn't in Greece anymore. Back home in Mykonos, the mornings smelled like wild thyme and Mediterranean pine. Here, everything smelled like expensive cars and designer coffee. Even at 5 in the morning, the beach was almost empty. Just a few early morning surfers checking the waves, and an elderly man walking his golden retriever. Perfect, I could lose myself in the rhythm of my feet hitting the sand, in the sound of my breathing and the distant crash of waves. This was the only time I felt anything close to peace anymore. I'd been running for maybe 20 minutes. When I decided to stop and catch my breath near the Santa Monica Pier, my heart was pounding. But it was a good kind of pounding, the kind that came from physical exertion instead of anxiety or night terrors. I stood there with my hands on my hips, watching the sun start to paint the horizon in shades of gold and orange that reminded me of my mother's favorite sunset photographs. That's when I heard it. The sound of bicycle tires on sand, moving way too fast for the early morning beach crowd. I turned to look, more out of curiosity than concern, and saw a flash of green eyes and dark hair flying toward me on a vintage beach cruiser that looked like it had been painted by someone who believed in magic. Time did this weird thing where it slowed down and sped up simultaneously. I could see every detail with crystal clarity, her hair whipping in the wind like black silk, her olive skin glowing in the early morning light, her eyes wide with what looked like recognition rather than surprise. But I couldn't move fast enough to get out of the way. The impact knocked me flat on my back, sending sand flying everywhere. For a moment, I just lay there, staring up at the sky and wondering if I'd hit my head harder than I thought, because there was no way the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen had just materialized out of nowhere and literally crashed into my life. But when I sat up, there she was, crouched beside me with those impossible green eyes studying my face like she was reading a book she'd been looking for her entire life. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice carrying just the faintest trace of an accent I couldn't quite place. "Are you hurt?" I opened my mouth to tell her I was fine, that accidents happen, that she should probably be more careful riding that fast on a beach. But before I could get a single word out, she placed her hand on my forehead and said something that made my entire world tilt on its axis. Eta Psi, Upsilon Chi Sigma Omicron, Upsilon Phi, Omega Nu, Y Zeta Epsilon Iota, Alpha Pi, G Tau, Omicron Nu Pi, G Nu Omicron, Alpha Lambda, Lambda, Y Delta, Epsilon Nu Theta, Alpha Epsilon Y Sigma Alpha, Epsilon Y Sigma Alpha, Iota, Alpha. Your soul cries out in pain. But you won't be alone anymore. It was ancient Greek, not the modern Greek I'd grown up speaking with my family, but the old language, the kind my grandmother used to whisper when she thought no one was listening. The kind she'd used to tell me stories about gods and heroes and destinies that couldn't be escaped. "How did you... I started, but she was already standing up, brushing sand off her sundress like nothing extraordinary had just happened. "I really am sorry about the bike," she said, switching back to perfect English. "I was distracted. Sometimes I get these feelings, like I'm supposed to be somewhere specific at a specific time, and I just follow them without thinking." I struggled to my feet, still staring at her. Up close, she was even more striking. Her skin had that golden olive tone that spoke of Mediterranean ancestry, and her eyes weren't just green. They were the color of sea glass, shifting and changing in the early morning light. But it was more than her physical beauty that had me transfixed. There was something about her presence that felt familiar, like coming home after a long journey to a place you'd forgotten you missed. "What did you just say to me?" I asked. In Greek, she tilted her head to one side, studying me with those penetrating eyes. "You understood it. It wasn't a question." She said it like she'd known I would understand it, like she'd been counting on it. "My grandmother used to speak like that," I said slowly. "Ancient Greek. She was from a family that traced their lineage back to the Byzantine Empire. She died when I was 15. Yaya Penelope would have understood," she said softly, and my heart nearly stopped. "How do you know my grandmother's name?" But instead of answering, she reached into a small bag slung across her shoulder and pulled out something that made my breath catch in my throat. It was an ancient Greek coin, silver and worn smooth by countless hands, suspended on a leather cord, the exact same type of coin my grandmother had worn around her neck every day of her life, the one that had been buried with her. "This belongs to you now," she said, pressing it into my palm. Her fingers were warm against my skin, and for just a moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in 8 years. Peace, actual, honest, God peace, like someone had suddenly turned off the noise machine that had been running in my head since the night my parents died. "I don't understand," I said, but when I looked up from the coin, she was already walking away, pushing her bicycle through the sand with the kind of grace that made it look like she was floating. "Wait," I called after her. I don't even know your name." She paused and looked back at me over her shoulder, and for just a second, I could have sworn I saw something ancient and knowing in those green eyes, something that made me think of temple, priestesses, and oracle predictions. "Cassandra," she said, "and we'll meet again, Alexandros Katanides, soon." Then she was gone, disappearing around the curve of the beach like she'd never been there at all, except for the coin in my hand and the lingering scent of jasmine and sea salt in the air. Have you ever had one of those moments where your entire life suddenly feels like it's been leading up to a single point in time, where everything that came before suddenly makes sense, even though you can't explain why? That's what this felt like. Like 8 years of sleepless nights and guilt and isolation had all been preparing me for this moment. For this woman who spoke ancient Greek and knew my grandmother's name and looked at me like she could see, straight through to my soul. I walked back to my house in a daze, the coin clutched so tightly in my fist that it left an imprint on my palm. It was warm, warmer than it should have been, and etched into the silver was the image of an owl with its wings spread wide. The symbol of Athena, goddess of wisdom. The same symbol that had been on my grandmother's coin. For the first time in 8 years, I felt like I had a purpose beyond just surviving. I was going to find her. It was my friend Nikos who finally gave me the break I needed. Nikos Christos Andredis owned a small Greek restaurant in Venice Beach. The kind of authentic family place that served food like his grandmother had made back in Crete. We'd met years earlier when I'd been going through one of my particularly dark phases and had wandered into his restaurant at 2 in the morning, looking for something that tasted like home. "You're looking different today," Nikos said when I walked into his restaurant that evening. "Less like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders." "I met someone," I said, settling onto a bar stool, "on the beach this morning." Nikos raised an eyebrow. In all the years we'd been friends, I'd never once mentioned meeting anyone. "Tell me about her," he said, setting a glass of wine in front of me without being asked. So I told him about the bike crash and the ancient Greek and the coin that was still warm in my pocket. About the way she'd looked at me and the way she'd said my name and the feeling I couldn't shake that this was more than just a chance encounter. "Cassandra, you said," he finally asked. "You know her, maybe?" He reached under the bar and pulled out a business card. "There's a woman who comes in here sometimes. She's a professor at UCLA, teaches ancient Greek history. Beautiful woman, dark hair, green eyes. Name's Cassandra something." I practically snatched the card out of his hand. It was for the UCLA Department of Classics, and there at the bottom was a name that made my heart skip. Dr. Cassandra Evangeline Morphou, Associate Professor of Ancient Greek Studies. "This is her," I said. "This has to be her. She's an interesting woman," Nikos said. "Always comes in alone, always brings a book. Ancient texts, usually. There's something about her that feels ... old. Like she's carrying centuries of wisdom around with her." The next morning, I found myself standing outside the UCLA Department of Classics like a nervous college student. I'd been there for maybe 10 minutes when the door opened and she walked out. She was wearing a flowing skirt and a simple white blouse, her dark hair pulled back in a loose bun. She looked like she'd stepped out of a classical painting. All olive skin and graceful movements and that aura of ancient wisdom that had captured me so completely on the beach. She saw me immediately, and instead of looking surprised, she smiled, like she'd been expecting me. "Right on time," she said, walking over to where I was standing. "I was wondering when you'd figure out where to find me. You were expecting me. I've been having dreams about you, Alexandros, she said, and my name on her lips sounded like a prayer. For weeks now. Dreams about a man with sad eyes who'd forgotten how to believe in magic. Dreams about souls calling out to each other across time and space. I stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. That's impossible, is it? She reached out and touched the spot on my chest where I was wearing her coin, hidden beneath my shirt. How does it feel, the coin? And the truth was, it felt like it belonged there. Like it had always belonged there. Warm against my skin, pulsing, with its own gentle rhythm that somehow matched my heartbeat perfectly. I don't understand any of this, I said. You don't have to understand it, Cassandra said. You just have to trust it. Trust me. Over the following days, Cassandra and I began meeting regularly. The Getty Villa, where we'd walk among ancient statues and she'd tell me stories about the gods they represented. Stories that sounded less like mythology and more like family history. The Santa Monica Mountains at sunset, where we'd sit on weathered rocks and watch the light paint the sky in colors that reminded me of home. But it was our conversations that truly captivated me. Cassandra had this way of talking that made everything feel significant, like every word was chosen for a specific purpose. Tell me about your family, she said one afternoon as we sat in a small cafe in Little Greece. Not the business empire or the tragedy. Tell me about the people. I found myself opening up to her in ways I hadn't with anyone. I told her about my father, Dimitris, who'd built the shipping company from nothing but determination and a fishing boat his grandfather had left him, how he'd taught me to sail before I could properly walk, how he'd taken me to the docks every Sunday to show me that our family's fortune came from understanding the sea, not conquering it. He used to say that the ocean was like a woman, I told her, beautiful and dangerous and impossible to truly possess. You could only hope to be worthy of her attention. And your mother, Elena, I said, and even saying her name felt like a prayer. She was an artist. She used to tell me that every person carries multiple lifetimes' worth of experience in their soul, but most people forget how to access those memories. She believed in reincarnation, in souls finding each other again and again across centuries. Cassandra went very still at that, her sea glass eyes studying my face with an intensity that made my heart race. Do you believe that? She asked quietly. I didn't, I said, until I met you. The silence that followed was charged with something electric. Cassandra reached across the table and took my hand, and the moment our skin touched, I felt that same jolt of recognition I'd experienced on the beach, like coming home, like remembering something crucial I'd somehow forgotten. Alexandros, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. There's something I need to tell you. Something about who I am, about why I came here. But before she could continue, the cafe door chimed and a man walked in who made my blood run cold. Stavros Katanides, my father's brother and the current CEO of our family empire. He spotted me immediately, his sharp eyes taking in the intimate scene. The way Cassandra and I were holding hands across the table. Alexandros, he said, walking over with that practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. How nice to see you out and about. You've been quite difficult to reach lately. I dropped Cassandra's hand and stood up, instinctively moving to put myself between her and my uncle. There was something about the way Stavros was looking at her that set every protective instinct I had on high alert. Stavros, I said, keeping my voice carefully neutral. I wasn't expecting to see you here. Aren't you going to introduce me to your friend, Every instinct I had was screaming at me not to do that, but I could hardly be rude without explanation. Cassandra Morphou, this is my uncle, Stavros Katanides. Stavros, this is Cassandra. She's a professor at UC. Professor Morphou, Stavros said, extending his hand. What a pleasure. And what do you teach? Ancient Greek studies, Cassandra replied, accepting his handshake with obvious reluctance. Specifically, the intersection of mythology and historical fact. Something flickered in Stavros's eyes at that, something that looked almost like fear. How fascinating. And how did you and my nephew meet? By accident, I said quickly. A chance encounter. Ah, yes, Stavros said, that cold smile never wavering. The famous Katanides luck, always finding ourselves in the right place at the right time. There was something about the way he said it that made it sound like a threat rather than a compliment. After he left, Cassandra and I sat back down, but the intimate atmosphere from before had been shattered. She was staring at the door. Where Stavros had disappeared, her expression troubled. That man, she said slowly. There's something dark around him. Something that feels like ... deception. Betrayal. You can sense that. Sometimes I know things about people, things I shouldn't know. It's part of why I became interested in ancient Greek culture. The oracles, the seers, the priestesses who could read the threads of fate. What did you sense about Stavros? Guilt, she said without hesitation. Heavy, crushing guilt and fear. He's afraid of something, something that has to do with you. She paused, studying my face. Alexandros, the night your parents died, tell me exactly what happened. I'd never told anyone the complete story. But sitting there with Cassandra, feeling the warmth of her hand in mine, and seeing the genuine concern in her eyes, I found myself speaking words I'd kept locked away for 8 years. We were supposed to take the yacht out for a family dinner. I began, just the 3 of us, celebrating my acceptance to graduate school. But that morning, Stavros called with some emergency about a shipping contract in Athens. My father was furious about having to deal with business on what was supposed to be family time. I could see it all so clearly. My father, usually so calm and controlled, pacing the kitchen while he talked to Stavros on the phone. My mother, trying to soothe his anger while packing a picnic basket for our evening on the water. The strange thing was, the contract Stavros was calling about turned out to be non-existent. When we called Athens the next day to follow up, they had no idea what we were talking about. But by then, it was too late. What happened on the yacht? Everything was fine at first. We sailed out about 2 miles, dropped anchor, had dinner. Then my father called out that something was wrong. The boat was listing to starboard, taking on water somewhere below deck. We all went down to investigate, but the water was coming in faster than we could figure out where it was coming from. Even now, 8 years later, I could still feel the panic of that moment. The cold water rising around our ankles, my father's hands shaking as he tried to work the radio, my mother's voice saying prayers in ancient Greek. My father managed to get the life raft deployed, but there was only time to get 1 person in before the yacht went under. He physically pushed me into the raft, told me to take care of the family legacy. I watched them disappear beneath the waves, and I couldn't do anything to save them. I was crying by the time I finished, tears I'd been holding back for 8 years finally finding their way to the surface. Cassandra didn't try to comfort me with empty words. She just held my hand and let me grieve. The investigation found mechanical failure, I said when I could speak again. A stress fracture in the hull that had probably been developing for months. Just one of those tragic accidents that sometimes happen at sea. But you don't believe. That I did for years. But lately, since meeting you, I have been remembering details that didn't make sense at the time. Like how Stavros seemed to know about the accident before the Coast Guard had even identified the bodies. Like how quickly he stepped in to take control of the company, almost like he'd been preparing for it. Cassandra was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. In ancient Greece, she said, there was a concept called Moira, fate, destiny, the thread of each person's life that was spun by the fates themselves. But the Greeks also believed that sometimes people tried to cut each other's threads before their time. They had a word for it. Katie knows murder disguised as accident. The words hit me like a physical blow. You think Stavros killed my parents? I think, Cassandra said carefully, that you need to be very careful around your uncle. And I think you need to start asking questions you've been afraid to ask. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Was going to find out the truth about my parents' death, and I was going to do it with Cassandra's help. But first, I needed to understand more about who she really was. I called her early and asked if she wanted to take a trip with me. Where are we going? She asked. To see someone who might have answers, I said. About both of us. 2 hours later, we were driving north along the Pacific Coast Highway in my Porsche. The ocean sparkling to our left and the Santa Monica Mountains rising to our right. Cassandra had her window down, her dark hair whipping in the wind, and she looked like some ancient goddess of the sea taking human form to walk among mortals. You never did tell me what you were going to say yesterday, I said. Before interrupted us. You said there was something about who you are, about why you came here. She was quiet for so long that I thought maybe she hadn't heard me. But when I glanced over, I saw that she was staring out at the ocean with an expression of deep sadness. I wasn't entirely honest with you about the dreams, she said finally. About how long I've been having them. What do you mean? I've been dreaming about you my entire life, Alexandros. Since I was a child. Dreams about a man with dark hair and sad eyes, who carried the weight of tragedy on his shoulders. Dreams about ancient temples and olive groves, and a love that transcended death itself. She turned to look at me, and I had to force myself to keep my eyes on the road because the intensity of her gaze was overwhelming. My grandmother, Yaya Penelope, she had the same dreams when she was young. Dreams about a man she would meet in a future lifetime, a man whose soul called out to hers across centuries. She told me that our family carries the gift of sight, the ability to see connections that exist beyond the boundaries of time and space. Are you saying we've known each other before, in other lives? I'm saying, Cassandra said softly, that some souls are bound together by something stronger than death. I'm saying that I've been waiting for you my entire life, and when I saw you on that beach, I knew exactly who you were. Our destination was a small ranch in the hills above Malibu, where Yaya Penelope Asterios lived in a house that looked like it had been transplanted directly from the Greek islands. Whitewashed walls, blue painted shutters, and a garden full of herbs that perfumed the air with scents of oregano and lavender. Cassandra's grandmother was waiting for us on the front porch, as if she'd known we were coming. She was tiny and ancient, with silver hair braided in a crown around her head and eyes the same startling green as her granddaughter's. But there was something timeless about her presence, something that made me think of oracle priestesses and temple ceremonies. So, she said in heavily accented English, rising from her chair to greet us, You are the one my Cassandra has been waiting for. It wasn't a question. She said it like a fact, like something she'd known for years. Yeah, Cassandra said, kissing her grandmother's weathered cheek. This is Alexandros. Alexandros, this is my grandmother, Penelope. The old woman took my hands in hers, and the moment our skin touched, I felt that same jolt of recognition I experienced every time I touched Cassandra. But with Yaya Penelope, it was different, deeper, like she was reading the story of my soul through my palms. Ah, she said, her eyes widening. Yes, I see. You are the one from the dreams. The one who carries the silver coin of Athena. I reached instinctively for my chest, where the coin hung beneath my shirt. How did you know about that? Instead of answering, she led us into her house, which felt like walking into a temple dedicated to the preservation of ancient Greek culture. Every surface was covered with artifacts, pottery painted with scenes from Homer, statues of gods and goddesses, old photographs of Greek islands that looked like postcards from paradise. Sit, she commanded, gesturing to a low table surrounded by cushions. We have much to discuss. She disappeared into the kitchen and returned with coffee and pastries that tasted like my childhood, like my grandmother's kitchen in Mykonos Tell. Me, young man, she said, settling herself across from us. What do you know about your family's history? Not the business, not the money. The real history. I know we've been in shipping for generations, I said. That we came from Mykonos originally, that my great-great-grandfather started with a single fishing vessel, and your grandmother, Penelope Katanides, she died when I was 15. She was, unusual. She believed in old traditions, old stories. She used to tell me that our family was descended from temple priests, that we had a responsibility to preserve ancient wisdom. Yeah, Penelope nodded slowly. Your grandmother and I, we were cousins, distant cousins, but family nonetheless. We both carried the gift of sight, the ability to see the threads that connect souls across lifetimes. She reached into a small, wooden box beside her chair and pulled out a photograph so old it was sepia-tinted around the edges. It showed two young women standing in front of what looked like an ancient temple, their arms around each other's shoulders, both wearing silver, coins identical to the one hanging around my neck. This was taken in 1943 on the island of Delos, she said, passing me the photograph. Your grandmother and I, when we were both 19 years old. I stared at the photograph, my hands trembling slightly. The woman on the left was unmistakably my grandmother, but younger than I'd ever seen her. But it was the woman on the right that made my breath catch in my throat. She looked exactly like Cassandra. That's impossible, I whispered. Is it, Yaya? Penelope asked. Look more closely at the background. I examined the photograph more carefully, and my heart nearly stopped. There, carved into the stone wall behind them, was an inscription in ancient Greek, and standing in front of that inscription, partially visible in the shadows, was the figure of a young man who could have been my twin. The inscription, Cassandra said softly, taking the photograph from my trembling hands, says souls bound by Athena's wisdom shall find each other across all lifetimes, every generation. Yaya, Penelope explained, the same souls are reborn. Sometimes they find each other, sometimes they don't. But when they do, when the connection is strong enough, they remember. They recognize each other. I felt like the world was tilting around me, like everything I thought I knew about reality was reshaping itself into something entirely new. You're saying Cassandra and I are reincarnations of souls who have loved each other for centuries, she finished, who have found each other again and again in different lives, different times, different circumstances, but always, always drawn together by something stronger than death. But why now? Cassandra asked. Why this lifetime? The old woman's expression grew grave. Because this time you have a purpose beyond love. This time you must right an ancient wrong. You must bring justice to those who have been betrayed. She looked directly at me, and her green eyes seemed to hold the weight of centuries. Your parents were not killed by accident, Alexandros. They were murdered by someone who knew about your family's true purpose. Someone who feared what you might discover about your heritage. Someone who wanted to control the Katanides' legacy for his own dark purposes. The room went completely silent except for the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. Everything I'd suspected, everything I'd been afraid to believe, was being confirmed by an old woman who spoke of reincarnation and ancient curses like they were simple facts. Stavros, I said, and it wasn't a question. Your uncle has been planning this for years, she continued. He knows about your family's real history, about the artifacts and knowledge that have been passed down through generations. He killed your parents to prevent them from telling you the truth. What truth, Yaya? Penelope stood up and walked to an ornate chest in the corner of the room. She returned with something wrapped in ancient silk, something that made the air around us feel charged with electricity. The truth about what your family has been protecting for over 2,000 years, she said, carefully unwrapping the silk to reveal a scroll so old it looked like it might crumble at a touch. The truth about why the gods chose your bloodline to be guardians of their most precious secrets. The scroll was covered in symbols I didn't recognize, but somehow, impossibly, I could read them. They told a story of ancient temples and sacred treasures, of families chosen by Athena herself to protect artifacts that could change the course of human history. The silver coins, Cassandra breathed, understanding flooding her voice. They're not just family heirlooms, they're keys. Keys to what? I asked. To the hidden temple of Athena on Delos, Yaya, Penelope said, where your ancestors stored treasures beyond imagining. Scrolls containing the lost wisdom of ancient Greece. Artifacts blessed by the gods themselves. Knowledge that could revolutionize our understanding of human consciousness and spiritual evolution. I thought about Stavros, about his reaction to meeting Cassandra, about the way he'd seemed afraid when she mentioned mythology and historical fact. If he knew about our family's true purpose, if he'd killed my parents to gain access to ancient treasures. He's been searching for the temple, I said, the pieces finally falling into place. That's why he took control of the company, why he's been expanding our operations in the Aegean. He's using our shipping routes to search for the hidden temple. But he cannot find it without you, Yaya, Penelope said. The temple reveals itself only to those who carry the true bloodline, and only when they are accompanied by their soul's other half. She looked meaningfully at Cassandra and me, and I felt the weight of destiny settling around my shoulders like a cloak. You must return to Greece, she continued. You must find the temple before Stavros does, and you must be prepared for him to do anything to stop you. That evening, as Cassandra and I drove back toward the city, my mind was reeling with everything we'd learnt. Reincarnation, ancient temples, murderous uncles, divine artifacts. It all sounded like the plot of some fantastical novel, not the story of my actual life. But the coin around my neck was warm against my skin, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat, and every time I looked at Cassandra, I felt that sense of recognition, that feeling of coming home that transcended rational explanation. "Are you okay?" she asked, as we sat in traffic near sunset, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. That reminded me of Mykonos. I keep waiting to wake up, I admitted. This all feels too impossible to be real. Does it feel impossible? She asked. Or does it feel like finally understanding something you've always known but couldn't quite remember? She was right. As crazy as everything sounded, it explained so much. The dreams I'd been having since childhood, the way I'd always felt drawn to ancient Greek culture despite being raised in a thoroughly modern business family. The sense that I was meant for something more than just inheriting my parents' empire. And it explained Cassandra. The inexplicable connection I'd felt from the moment I saw her. The way she seemed to understand parts of me I'd never shown to anyone. The feeling that I'd been waiting my entire life to meet her. What do we do now? I asked. Now, she said, reaching across the car to take my hand, we start planning a trip to Greece. We find this temple. We discover what Stavros is really after, and we make sure he pays for what he did to your parents. The determination in her voice sent a thrill through me. This woman, this incredible, mysterious woman who spoke ancient Greek and carried the wisdom of lifetimes in her eyes, was willing to risk everything to help me find justice for my family. But as we sat there in traffic, watching the sun set over the Pacific, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. That somewhere in the city behind us, Stavros was planning his next move. And that our journey to uncover the truth was going to be far more dangerous than either of us could imagine. Because if what Yaya Penelope had told us was true, if Stavros really had killed my parents for access to ancient treasures, then he wouldn't hesitate to kill us too if he discovered what we were planning. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it filled me with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since the night my parents died. Finally, I had a reason to fight. I had something worth protecting, someone worth protecting, and a legacy to reclaim that went far beyond money and business success. I looked at Cassandra, at the way the setting sun caught the gold in her skin and made her green eyes seem to glow from within. And I knew with absolute certainty that whatever came next, whatever dangers we faced, we would face them together, because some bonds are stronger than death. Some love stories span lifetimes. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe gives you a second chance to get it right. Over the next few days, we began making concrete plans for our trip to Greece. Cassandra had contacts at archaeological sites throughout the Aegean, connections that would give us access to places tourists never saw. I had the resources and the family shipping network that could get us anywhere we needed to go without raising Stavros' suspicions. But more than the logistics, we were preparing emotionally for what lay ahead. Because, according to Yaya Penelope, finding the temple wasn't just about following clues or solving puzzles. It was about awakening memories that had been sleeping for lifetimes. About becoming worthy of the trust the gods had placed in our bloodlines centuries ago. The dreams are getting stronger, Cassandra told me one evening as we walked along the beach where we'd first met. More vivid. I'm starting to remember things from other lives, other times when we've been together. What kind of things? A temple in ancient Athens, where you were a priest of Athena and I was an oracle. A small island during the Byzantine Empire, where we were both scholars working to preserve ancient texts from being destroyed. A village in Crete during the Ottoman occupation, where we hid artifacts from conquering armies. She stopped walking and turned to face me, her green eyes reflecting the moonlight like sea glass. In every lifetime, we've been protectors, guardians of something precious that the world wasn't ready to lose. And in every lifetime, We've loved each other with the kind of intensity that burns through everything else. I reached out and touched her face, feeling the familiar jolt of recognition that had become as natural as breathing. And in every lifetime, I said, we've had to fight for that love. We've had to face people who would destroy everything we've tried to protect. People like Stavros, yes, but this time is different. This time, we're going to win. The conviction in my own voice surprised me. For 8 years, I'd been living like a ghost, existing but not really alive. But now, with Cassandra beside me and the truth about my family's legacy finally revealed, I felt like I was waking up from a long, dark dream. As we made our final preparations for the trip to Greece, I found myself thinking about my parents more than I had in years. Not the nightmare version of their last moments, but the people that really been. My father, with his quiet strength and his deep respect for the power of the sea. My mother, with her artist's soul and her belief in the eternal nature of love. They'd known, I realized, they'd known about our family's true purpose, about the temple and the artifacts and the sacred trust that had been passed down through generations. And they'd died protecting that knowledge from someone who would have used it for evil, but their sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. Cassandra and I would find the temple. We would reclaim what belonged to our families, and we would make sure that Stavros paid for what he'd done. Have you ever felt like your entire life was just the prologue to the real story? Like everything that came before was just preparation for the moment when you finally step into your true destiny? That's how I felt as our plane lifted off from Lax, carrying us toward Athens and toward a confrontation that had been brewing for lifetimes. Beside me, Cassandra squeezed my hand as the California coastline disappeared beneath the clouds. The ancient coin around my neck was warm against my skin, and I could feel its twin, hanging around Cassandra's neck, pulsing in perfect rhythm with mine. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. I thought about the question, ready to face my uncle, who had murdered my parents for greed, ready to unlock mysteries that had been hidden for 2,000 years, ready to embrace a love that had survived death itself. "I've been ready my entire life," I said. "I just didn't know it until I met you." As our plane headed east toward the sunrise, toward Greece, and toward the answers we'd been seeking, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 8 years. Hope, real, unshakable hope that the story of Alexandros and Cassandra wasn't ending in tragedy this time. This time, we were going to rewrite the ending. This time, love was going to triumph over greed. This time, the Guardians were going to reclaim what had always been theirs. And somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, with the woman I'd loved across lifetimes sleeping peacefully beside me, I finally understood what my father had meant when he told me to take care of our legacy. It wasn't about money or business success. It was about protecting something infinitely more valuable, the wisdom of the ages, the love that connects souls across time, and the unbreakable bond between two people who were destined to find each other no matter how many lifetimes it took. The real journey was just beginning, but let me tell you what happened in those crucial days leading up to our departure. Because what Cassandra and I discovered about ourselves, about our connection, and about the magnitude of what we were about to face, would test every belief I'd ever held about reality. The morning after our visit to Yaya Penelope, I woke up in my Malibu mansion, feeling like a stranger in my own life. Everything looked the same: the marble floors, the expensive furniture, the panoramic ocean views. But I felt like I was seeing it all through different eyes, like I'd been sleepwalking through my existence for 8 years and had finally opened my eyes to discover I was someone completely different than I'd thought. Cassandra had stayed the night, curled up beside me in a way that felt so natural it was as if we'd been sleeping together for decades. When I opened my eyes, she was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the bed with the ancient scroll Yaya Penelope had given us spread out before her, studying the symbols with an intensity that made her green eyes seem to glow. "Good morning," I said, my voice still rough with sleep. "Learn anything new?" She looked up at me with an expression that was equal parts excitement and apprehension. "Alexandros, this isn't just a map to the temple. It's a complete genealogy. Our genealogy, going back over 2,000 years. I sat up, suddenly wide awake. "What do you mean?" She pointed to a section of the scroll covered in intricate symbols that looked like a family tree. "Look here, these aren't just names, they're soul signatures. The same patterns repeating over and over again across centuries, but in different bodies, different lives." I studied the symbols she was indicating, and even though I couldn't read most of them, there was something hauntingly familiar about the patterns. Like looking at sheet music for a song you'd known your whole life but never heard performed. "Here," she said, pointing to two intertwined symbols near the bottom of the scroll. "These are us, in this lifetime. But look," her finger traced upward. Through the scroll, the same patterns, over and over. Ancient Greece, the Byzantine Empire, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment. We've been finding each other and loving each other for over 20 centuries. The magnitude of what she was saying hit me like a physical blow. 20 centuries of love, of connection, of souls drawn together by forces beyond human understanding. It explained so much, the instant recognition I'd felt when I saw her on the beach. The way her touch could calm the storms in my mind. The feeling that I'd been incomplete my entire life until the moment she crashed into it. But it explains something else too, Cassandra continued, her voice growing grave. "Look at this pattern." She pointed to another set of symbols that appeared alongside ours throughout the scroll. But these were darker, more angular, like shadows cast by our intertwined souls. Every lifetime where we've found each other, there's been someone else. Someone who tries to separate us, who tries to steal what we're protecting. The same soul, reborn again and again, driven by the same jealousy and greed. I stared at the dark symbols, and with a chill that went straight to my bones, I knew exactly who she was talking about. Stvos, or whoever his soul was in past lives. A corrupt temple priest in ancient Athens who tried to steal sacred artifacts. A Byzantine official who murdered scholars to seize their libraries. A Venetian merchant who betrayed allies for gold. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with ancient sadness. In every lifetime, the same story. Love and betrayal, protection and greed, light and shadow. "But we've never won," I said, understanding flooding through me. "In all those lifetimes, we've never actually defeated him." "No," Cassandra said softly. "We've always died protecting what we loved, but we've never lived to see justice done. The artifacts have been lost, the knowledge scattered, the evil allowed to continue into the next generation, until now." "Until now," she agreed. "Because this time, we know. This time, we're prepared. This time, we have the chance to break the cycle." Over the next 3 days, as we made our final preparations for Greece, strange things began happening. Not just the intensifying dreams, though those were becoming so vivid that sometimes I'd wake up speaking ancient Greek or smelling olive groves and sea salt instead of California eucalyptus. No, it was more than that. I was remembering things I'd never learned, walking through the Getty Villa with Cassandra. I found myself correcting the tour guide about the provenance of a particular statue. "That's not from the Hellenistic period," I heard myself saying. "It's from the temple of Athena Parthenos, stolen during the sack of Athens in 267 AD. The tour guide stared at me like I'd lost my mind, but Cassandra squeezed my hand and whispered, "You're right, I can feel it too." And I was. Without knowing how or why, I could sense the history of objects, could feel the hands that had carved them, the prayers that had been offered before them, the grief of those who had watched them being taken from their sacred homes. But it wasn't just ancient artifacts. Modern technology seemed to respond to me differently too. Security systems that should have been impenetrable opened at my touch. Locked doors swung open when I approached them. It was as if the barriers that separated me from the world were growing thinner, as if awakening to my true nature was giving me access to abilities I'd never known I possessed. Cassandra was experiencing similar changes. She'd always been intuitive, but now her abilities bordered on the supernatural. She could sense people's intentions from across a room, could read the history of objects by touching them, could sometimes even glimpse fragments of the future. In her dreams, "We're becoming who we really are," she explained one evening as we walked along the beach where we'd first met. "Every lifetime, we've carried fragments of our true selves, our true abilities. But this time, because we've found each other early, because we know what we're facing, the awakening is more complete." "Are we still human?" I asked, only half joking. "We're what humans were meant to be," she said. "Before the world forgot about magic, before people stopped believing in the connection between souls and the divine, we're remembering our birthright. But with these new abilities came a growing sense of urgency. Because if we were changing, becoming more powerful, then Stavros would sense it. And if he realized that we were awakening to our true nature, he would move against us before we were ready." That urgency proved prophetic. On our last night in California, as Cassandra and I were doing a final check of our preparations, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Stavros's number, but when I answered, the voice on the other end wasn't his. "Mr. Katanides," the voice was. Professional, clipped, with the kind of accent that suggested expensive education and dangerous connections. "My name is Dr. Marcus Thorne. I work for your uncle." "What do you want?" I asked, motioning for Cassandra to listen in. "Mr. has asked me to extend an invitation. He's currently in Athens on business, and he'd very much like to see you. There are some family matters that require your immediate attention." "What kind of family matters?" "I'm afraid that's something Mr. Stavros prefers to discuss in person. But I can tell you that it concerns certain ... artifacts ... that belong to your family line. Artifacts that have recently come to his attention." Cassandra's eyes went wide. Somehow, Stavros knew. Either he'd been watching us, or his own awakening memories had told him that we were close to discovering the truth. "When?" I asked. "Tomorrow, if possible. Mr. Stavros has arranged for a private jet to collect you from Lax. All expenses paid." Of course, I looked at Cassandra, who was already shaking her head. Walking into Stavros's trap in Athens was exactly what we couldn't afford to do. "But if we refused, ... can I bring a guest?" I asked. There was a pause. I believe Mr. Stavros was hoping for a private family discussion. "It's not negotiable," I said. "If I come, she comes." Another pause, longer this time. "Very well. The jet will be ready at 10 a.m. Terminal 7, private aviation section." After he hung up, Cassandra and I sat in silence for a long moment. "It's a trap," she said finally. "Obviously. But if we don't go, he'll know we're on to him. And if he's in Athens, near the archaeological sites, he could find the temple without us if he has enough resources." Exactly. Better to face him on his terms than let him get there first. But even as I said it, I could feel the weight of history pressing down on us. How many times had we made similar decisions in past lives? How many times had we walked knowingly into danger because the alternative was letting evil triumph? "This time will be different," Cassandra said, reading my thoughts with the telepathic connection that was growing stronger between us every day. "This time, we know what we're walking into, and this time, we have something he doesn't." "What's that?" She held up her silver coin, which was glowing faintly in the darkness of my living room. "The blessings of Athena herself, and 2,000 years worth of love to give us strength." The flight to Athens was surreal. Stavros had sent a private Gulf Stream that made my own considerable wealth look modest by comparison. The interior was decorated with what I now recognized as genuine ancient Greek artifacts, pottery, sculpture, even fragments of frescoes that should have been in museums. "He's been collecting for years," Cassandra observed, running her fingers over a red figure amphora that depicted scenes from the Odyssey. "Some of these pieces are priceless and stolen." But it was the flight attendant who really caught our attention. She was beautiful in that artificial way that spoke of expensive surgery and careful training. But there was something cold about her eyes, something that made me think of reptiles basking in the sun. "Dr. Morphew," she said to Cassandra with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Mr. Stavros speaks of you often. He's very interested in your research." "Does he?" Cassandra replied neutrally. "Oh yes, particularly your work on ancient mystery religions and their ... practical applications." The way she said it made my skin crawl. Practical applications, as if the sacred wisdom of the ancients was just another tool to be exploited for power and profit. During the 10-hour flight, Cassandra and I tried to rest, but our dreams were chaotic, filled with fragmentary images from past lives. I saw myself as a young priest in the Parthenon, desperately trying to hide sacred scrolls as Roman soldiers stormed the temple. I saw Cassandra as a Byzantine scholar, her hands bloody as she copied ancient texts by candlelight while barbarians burned the library around her. I saw us both in Renaissance Venice, fleeing assassins through midnight canals with a chest of artifacts that men would kill for. And in every vision, I saw Stavros. Different faces, different names, but always the same soul. Always the same hunger for power, the same willingness to destroy anything beautiful or sacred if it stood between him and his desires. When we finally landed in Athens, the sun was setting over the Acropolis, painting the ancient marble in shades of gold and rose that made my heart ache with homesickness I hadn't even known I was carrying. This was home in a way that California never could be. This was where my soul belonged. Stavros was waiting for us at the airport, standing beside a black Mercedes with diplomatic plates. He looked exactly as he had in California, expensively dressed, carefully groomed, radiating the kind of confidence that came from having more money than most small countries. But there was something different about him now, something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a kind of ancient hunger that made me think of sharks circling wounded prey. "Alexandros," he said, embracing me with what would have looked like genuine warmth to any observer. "Welcome home." "This isn't home," I replied, but I returned the embrace, playing the role of the unsuspecting nephew. "Isn't it?" He stepped back, and gestured toward the city spreading out below us. "This is where our family comes from, nephew. Where our blood was first shed in service to the gods." The way he said it made it clear that he knew. Whatever game we'd been playing was over. "Dr. Morphu," he continued, turning to Cassandra with that same shark-like smile. "How lovely to see you again. I trust the flight was comfortable." "Very," Cassandra replied. "Thank you for your hospitality. Think nothing of it. After all, we're practically family now, aren't we?" The drive into the city was a study in psychological warfare. Stavros pointed out landmarks with the air of a tour guide, but every comment carried an undercurrent of threat. "There's the National Archaeological Museum," he said as we passed a neoclassical building. "Some fascinating pieces there. Of course, the truly valuable artifacts are kept in private collections these days. So much safer than public institutions, don't you think?" "Safer for whom?" Cassandra asked. "For people who understand their true worth," Stavros replied. "The public sees these things as curiosities, museum pieces. But those of us with the proper bloodline, the proper knowledge, we understand that they're tools, keys to powers that most people can't even imagine." He was watching us in the rearview mirror as he spoke, gauging our reactions. I kept my face carefully neutral, but I could feel the silver coin around my neck growing warm against my skin. Our destination was a hotel in Plaka, the old quarter of Athens that nestled in the shadow of the Acropolis. From the outside, it looked like a typical boutique hotel. All whitewashed walls and blue shutters designed to appeal to tourists seeking an authentic Greek experience. But once we stepped inside, it became clear that this was no ordinary establishment. The lobby was filled with artifacts that I now knew shouldn't exist outside of major museums. A marble statue of Athena that must have been worth millions. Frescoes that had clearly been cut from ancient walls. Display cases filled with gold jewelry and ceremonial weapons that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. "Welcome to the Olympos Hotel," Stavros said. "I own it, of course. It's where I house my most significant acquisitions." "Acquisitions?" I asked. "Artifacts, knowledge, people." His smile was genuinely terrifying now. "Whatever I need to further my research." We were shown to adjacent rooms on the top floor, with windows that looked out over the ancient agora. It should have been breathtaking, but all I could feel was the weight of invisible chains settling around us. We were prisoners here, no matter how luxurious our cage. After the bellhop left, I tried the door to the hallway. It opened normally, but I could sense the electronic surveillance. The armed guards who were probably positioned at strategic points throughout the building. Stavros wasn't taking any chances. "Dinner in an hour," Stavros had said before leaving us. "We have so much to discuss." The moment he was gone, Cassandra and I huddled together on my bed, speaking in whispers. "Can you sense how many people are watching us?" I asked. She closed her eyes, extending her newfound abilities through the building. "At least 12, maybe more. They're not just hotel security. These are military, professional soldiers. He's not planning to let us leave, no. But Alexandros, there's something else. This building, it's built on top of something ancient. I can feel it beneath us, like a pulse in the earth itself." I pressed my palm to the floor, extending my own awakening senses downward. She was right. Below us, hidden beneath layers of modern construction, was something that resonated with the same frequency as our silver coins. Something sacred. Part of the temple complex, I breathed. Stavros didn't choose this location randomly. He's been excavating beneath the hotel, which means he's closer to finding the main temple than we thought. We spent the next hour planning, using a combination of spoken words and the telepathic connection that was growing stronger between us. Whatever happened at dinner, we had to find a way to get to the excavation site beneath the building, because if Stavros had found artifacts here, if he was already close to unlocking the secrets of our family's legacy, then every moment we delayed brought him closer to ultimate victory. When the time came, we dressed carefully. I wore a simple dark suit, with a silver coin hidden beneath my shirt, but positioned so I could reach it quickly if needed. Cassandra chose a flowing dress that looked elegant, but would allow her to move freely if we had to run or fight. The dining room was on the ground floor, an intimate space with only a single table set for 3. But what dominated the room wasn't the furniture or the view of the Acropolis. It was the wall display of ancient weapons, swords, spears, daggers, all of them genuine antiquities, and all of them sharp enough to kill. Stavros was waiting for us, dressed in an expensive suit that did nothing to hide the predatory gleam in his eyes. On the table before him was an ornate wooden box, ancient and covered in symbols that made my silver coin burn against my chest. "Please, sit," he said, gesturing to chairs across from him. "I've taken the liberty of ordering for you traditional Greek cuisine, prepared the way it would have been in ancient times." As if on cue, servers appeared with dishes that looked and smelled incredible. Roasted lamb with herbs, fresh bread, wine that tasted like it had been aged in amphoros. But neither Cassandra nor I touched our food. Something about the whole setup felt wrong, dangerous. "Not hungry?" Stavros asked, cutting into his lamb with what looked like an ancient ceremonial knife. "That's a shame. The food here is prepared according to recipes found in temple archives. Very authentic." "What do you want, Stavros?" I asked. "Straight to business. I appreciate that." He set down his knife and leaned back in his chair. "What I want, nephew, is quite simple. I want you to fulfill your destiny, which is to be the key that unlocks the greatest treasure in human history." He opened the wooden box on the table, revealing what looked like a silver coin identical to the ones Cassandra and I carried. But this one was different, darker. The owl symbol was inverted, its wings spread downward instead of up. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. Cassandra was staring at the coin with undisguised horror. "It's a corruption," she whispered. "A sacred symbol perverted into something evil." "Perversion is such an ugly word," Stavros said. "I prefer to think of it as ... optimization. Your ancestors were fools, Alexandros. They had access to power beyond imagination, and they wasted it on preservation and protection. They could have ruled the world, and instead they chose to hide in temples and libraries. They chose to serve something greater than themselves," I said. "And where did that get them? Dead. Generation after generation, they died protecting knowledge that could have made them gods. Well, I'm done with that particular family tradition." He picked up the dark coin, and I felt the silver coin around my neck grow almost painfully hot. "This is the anti-coin," he continued, "forged in the same sacred fires as yours, but blessed by different gods. Where yours opens doors and awakens wisdom, mine breaks, locks, and dominates will. Together, they can unlock the hidden temple completely, not just to enter it, but to command it. To take control of everything our ancestors hid away. And you need us to use it," Cassandra said. "I need your bloodline," Stavros corrected. "The temple recognizes genetic markers as well as spiritual ones. But don't worry, I don't need you to cooperate willingly." He snapped his fingers, and the doors to the dining room burst open. Armed men in tactical gear poured in, their weapons trained on us. But these weren't ordinary soldiers. Something about their eyes was wrong, empty, as if they were puppets, being controlled by an external will. "The temple chamber is directly beneath us," Stavros continued conversationally, as if we weren't surrounded by armed men. "I've spent 5 years excavating it, uncovering its secrets piece by piece. But the final chamber, the one that holds the real treasures, remains sealed. It requires a willing sacrifice from the bloodline of the Guardians." "Willing sacrifice?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I didn't want to hear the answer. "The ancient texts are quite specific. The blood of true Guardians, freely given in service to the temple's opening, will unlock powers that have slept for millennia. Of course, the Guardians themselves don't usually survive the process." That's when I understood. This had always been his plan, not just to find the temple, not just to steal its treasures, but to murder us in the exact spot where our ancestors had once served the gods. The ultimate corruption of everything our family had stood for. But Stavros had made one crucial mistake. He assumed that because he had the numbers, because he had the weapons, because he had spent years planning this moment, he had all the advantages. He had no idea what Cassandra and I had become. "You're right about one thing," I said, standing. "Slowly. Blood will be freely given tonight." The silver coin around my neck was now blazing with heat, and I could see that Cassandra's was doing the same. The ancient weapons on the walls began to vibrate, resonating with the same frequency. "But it won't be ours," Cassandra added, rising to stand beside me. That's when the lights went out, plunging the dining room into darkness. And in that darkness, 2 souls who had loved each other across 20 centuries of lifetimes finally stopped, running from their destiny and started fighting back.